Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to part 4 of my Game Boy Zero build guide. In this video we're going to be going over removal, modification, and installation of the screen into the Game Boy Zero, as well as installation of the cartridge slot, utilizing these 3D printed components that we got from Wormy on the pseudo-mod market. A couple other components that we got from Wormy are the top screw hole mounts, as well as the button guides. I'll leave a link in the description below to where you can actually go and pick up these 3D printed components for yourself. The screen I'm going to be using for this is the BW 3.5 inch backup camera screen. So I'll leave a link for this in the description below. Just a word of warning though, even if you get the same one that I link in the description, there are a handful of different variations of the circuitry inside of here. So if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, I'll also leave a link to the wiki page where people have gone through and actually modified all the different circuit boards to work with 5 volts. Before we get started, there's actually a few modifications that I've done that I wanted to share with you guys. So first off, you can see that I've actually cleaned up the screen hole opening. I've also slightly chamfered out the X and Y openings by using a razor blade and going around in a circle. And I wanted to give a shout out to Rotocop over on the forums for this idea. On the back casing here, you can see that I've actually ground down this corner here. And that's the corner that the Raspberry Pi sits in. It just needed a little more space in between the battery casing and the PCB board. And the last modification I did was actually to the Raspberry Pi itself. I ground down the 2 USB ports so they sit flush with the board. Now I did that so when I put the Raspberry Pi in the casing here, I can push it all the way up against the wall here and have the HDMI cable as close to the outside of the case as possible. The first thing that we're going to want to do is install these button guides into the Game Boy. To do this, we're going to set it down, put a couple dabs of hot glue around it, and then center it in place and let the hot glue dry. One more thing when you're installing these is you're going to want the holes on either side of the button guide to be horizontal, just like the ones below them. Once the glue's hardened a little bit, go ahead and add a little bit more to secure them in place. Once you have that extra bit of hot glue in there, we can then move on to installing the screen. Like I said in the beginning of this video, I'll put a link to the screen in the description below. But there's no guarantee that the internals of yours will be exactly the same as mine. But in the wiki, it will show you exactly how to modify it. The first thing we're going to need to do is remove the 2 screws in the bottom here. Now once we have those 2 screws removed, we can then lift up on the bottom and slide the top out. To remove the screen from the casing here, we're going to go ahead and push right in the center here, which will pop out the screen a little bit. You can see it right there. Now you got to be very careful when you're doing this because you can actually damage the screen itself. So just take it slow. And there we go. This is all that we're going to be using in the Game Boy Zero. So we can now remove this circuit board from the back of the screen. Now to remove this ribbon cable, we just lift up on these 2 black tabs on either side and the ribbon cable will pull right out. Now back at the front of the casing here, we're going to want to take a razor blade and cut off any excess glue that we have that's above this top hole right here. Now what doing that does is allows us to put the screen as low as possible in the casing because it does have this really large bottom chin here. Once we're all done with that, we're going to take our screen, drop it in, make sure it's centered, and then anchor it down with a couple dabs of glue in each corner. Now, while it's still warm, you can do some slight modifications to the alignment if necessary. Once the glue's hardened, you can then go ahead and put a little bead across the 3 sides. You're going to want to make sure you don't get any glue on the ribbon cable because the heat will actually damage it. Now that we have our screen mounted into our casing, we're going to move on to modifying the screen circuit board. Now, if your circuit board looks exactly like this, all we're going to do is run a jumper wire from the second prong up on the right side here to where this red wire goes on this pad here. Now that we have our jumper wire soldered in there, we're going to want to test the screen out. So on this screen, we have a positive, a negative, and instead of being a AV positive and an AV negative, it's actually an AV1 and an AV2. So on this unit, we're not actually going to be using the white wire. So to wire this up to test it, we're going to need our Raspberry Pi with the SD card in it, and we're going to wire up -1 on the outside, PP6, and the +1 on the inside, PP1. And then once we have those two wired in, we're going to take the yellow wire and hook it up to this one right here. It's the square one. If you look on the other side, you can see it actually says TV on it. Now that we have the screen circuit board wired into the Raspberry Pi, we're going to want to reconnect the screen to the chip. So to do this, you're going to want to make sure that the black tab is pushed up, and then slide the ribbon cable back in and push the tab back down. Now that the circuit board is connected back to our screen and wired up to the Raspberry Pi, we can now plug the Raspberry Pi in to test the screen out. Now that we know our screen is fully functioning, we can move to the back of the casing to install our cartridge slot. To install the DS Lite cartridge slot, we're going to take this larger of the two 3D printed components, and we're going to glue it down in this lower section here. Now that we have that piece glued down, we're going to take the cartridge slot and flip it over so the two holes are facing up. And then we're going to glue that down on top of this piece here. Now before the glue dries, you're going to want to take a cartridge and actually slide it in and clip it in place. And then you're also going to want to make sure that the cartridge slot is even. Now that the cartridge slot is dried in there, we're going to take the smaller of the two 3D printed pieces, put it on top of these two tabs right here, and we'll run a bead of glue along the back here, and also 2 dabs of glue on either side. Now when you do this, you want to make sure you don't get glue on the cartridge, otherwise it'll glue your cartridge in there. Now, once the glue has dried, you can then take your cartridge out and test and make sure that your cartridge slot is in there properly. Now back on the front, there's actually one more thing that I almost forgot about, and that's installing the upper screw bracket. Now this is actually really easy. You just set it on top of the screen, push it up so these two tabs are pushed up against the top, and then just run a bead of glue down to glue it down to the screen. There you have it. We now have our button guides, our screen, our top screw post mounts, and cartridge slot all installed in the Game Boy casing. So if this video helped you out and you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. In the next video, we're going to be going over the final installation of the PCB, as well as installing the L&R buttons in the back of the casing here. We'll also be installing the charging port, as well as a full-size USB. So definitely stay tuned for that and subscribe to be notified when that video goes up. And until then, I'll see you in the next video.